Most people don't realize just how much they communicate before they ever open their mouths. The moment you enter a room, before you've said a single word, people begin forming a judgment based on how you move, how you stand, how you look around. It's not superficial, it's deeply primal. Our nervous systems are wired to read subtle cues in body language, posture, and facial expression to assess safety, competence, confidence, and character. Think leg unfailed. It is so simple to just say something to connect. And so the question is, how do you command attention and respect in silence? The answer lies in mastering the power of presence. Presence isn't about being loud or demanding. It's the opposite, in fact. It's the ability to fill a space with calm certainty without needing to prove anything. You walk in upright, your shoulders back, chin level, eyes aware but not frantic, posture aligned, not slouched, not puffed up. That alone communicates volumes. You're signaling self-respect. You're communicating internal order, not chaos. And the truth is, people are magnetically drawn to order because it makes them feel secure. When someone lacks presence, they shrink. They fidget. Their eyes dart around. Their energy spills out uncontrollably. People feel that unease, and it repels rather than attracts. But when you've trained yourself to be fully grounded in your body, to breathe slowly, to move with intention, you become someone others can't help but notice. Your presence starts to carry weight. And in a world that's filled with noise, those who can command silence stand out. Now, some people try to fake this with arrogance or performance, but real presence doesn't come from pretending. It comes from knowing who you are. It comes from years of refining your internal dialogue, from disciplining your thoughts, from staying grounded even when you feel anxious or overwhelmed. That inner work shows outwardly, and when people sense it, they respect it. They may not be able to articulate what it is exactly, but they'll remember how they felt when they were around you. And that's where being unforgettable begins. There's another element here, eye contact. Not aggressive, not intrusive, but steady, composed, and engaged. The ability to look someone in the eye without flinching while remaining relaxed shows strength. It tells the other person, I'm not afraid to be seen. That kind of energy lingers in their mind long after the interaction ends. It's not about manipulation. It's about alignment between your internal state and external behavior. You're not over-explaining yourself. You're not chasing validation. You're simply occupying your own space fully and letting others feel the impact of your stillness. You also need to pay attention to how you enter situations. People who walk with intention, who don't rush, who don't slouch, who look like they have somewhere meaningful to be, create a psychological imprint. It's not about showing off. It's about moving like someone who knows they matter. And people will pick up on that. Over time, when you become this kind of presence, when your silence speaks louder than most people's noise, you begin to shape how others see you, how they remember you. They won't always know why, but something about you will feel rare. And in a world full of people desperately trying to be noticed through volume and vanity, you'll stand apart, quiet, grounded, unforgettable. Because the loudest person in the room may get attention, but it's the one who's most present that leaves the deepest impression. Confidence is not what most people think it is. It's not loud, it's not flashy, and it certainly isn't about dominance or showing off. Real confidence is quiet. It doesn't need validation, and it doesn't seek attention. You become unforgettable when you carry yourself with the kind of quiet confidence that's deeply rooted in self-trust. People feel it. They sense the difference between someone who's trying to be noticed and someone who simply knows who they are. One demands attention, the other commands it, without uttering a single word. The reason this kind of confidence stands out so strongly is because it's rare. Most people are anxious. They're caught up in how they're being perceived, they speak to be heard, they dress to impress, they posture to gain approval. But when you don't do that, when you just show up, grounded in your own skin, it unsettles people in a good way. It makes them stop and think, who is that? And they remember you, not because you said something clever or performed for them, but because you were whole in a room full of fragments. Quiet confidence comes from mastery over your inner world. You've faced yourself. You've worked through your fears, not by running from them, but by confronting them. You've failed and stood back up. You've kept your promises to yourself again and again. And over time, that consistency builds into something solid. When you walk into a room with that foundation, you don't need to posture. You don't need to play a part. You just are. And that is the impact. That's the energy that speaks louder than any words ever could. This kind of presence affects people on a psychological level. They might not even understand why they're drawn to you, but it's because you're not desperate, you're not performing, you're calm, you're focused, and that gives them permission to relax in your presence. In a world of overstimulation, a calm mind is magnetic. A person who can hold eye contact, speak when needed, listen deeply, and be totally content in silence becomes unforgettable because so few people can do it. But this doesn't come naturally. It takes practice. You have to learn how to regulate your nervous system, how to stay composed under pressure, how to let go of the need to impress. That's not weakness. That's power. The ability to remain still in a noisy world, to remain unshaken by external judgment. That's what real strength looks like. It's not about being emotionless. It's about being emotionally disciplined. And when people see that kind of restraint and self-possession, they can't help but respect it, even if they don't show it. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to fill space to be significant. You don't need to convince anyone that you matter. When your actions align with your values and your presence is built on inner clarity, you naturally stand apart. People will remember how you made them feel, safe, seen, and curious. You don't need to announce your worth, you simply need to embody it. And once you do, the impression you leave becomes something time can't erase. There's something incredibly powerful about restraint. In a world that constantly pushes you to react, to speak, to justify, to explain, holding back becomes a form of dominance. Not the kind that seeks to overpower others, but the kind that commands attention simply by existing on a higher plane. When you master restraint, you're not bottling up your emotions or pretending to be unaffected. You're choosing when and how to reveal yourself. You're telling the world, I'm not at the mercy of my impulses. Most people operate on emotional autopilot. They react the moment they feel something. They're triggered by small things. They over-explain, overshare, and overcompensate. But when you practice restraint, you disrupt that pattern. Not only in yourself, but in everyone who encounters you. You force people to slow down. You make them wonder. You become intriguing, not because you're mysterious on purpose, but because you're not playing the same emotional games everyone else is playing. And that difference, it leaves a mark. Restraint isn't silence, it's intentional communication. It's when you choose your moments. When you speak, it has weight, because people know you don't just fill the air to be heard. And when you don't speak, it also carries meaning. Your silence is not absence, it's presence. It's saying, I'm here, I'm observing, and I'm not giving you everything just because you want it. That kind of boundary, that self-control, it draws people in. It's the opposite of neediness. And in relationships, in work, in social dynamics, it creates leverage. Emotional restraint also protects your energy. When you're constantly reacting, constantly explaining yourself, you exhaust yourself. But when you learn to sit with discomfort, to hold back when the world demands you to spill, you preserve your power. You're not being rude or dismissive. You're just not offering yourself on demand. You are, in essence, saying, I will engage with the world on my terms. That choice gives you back control in a society that's always trying to steal it. And what happens is that people begin to notice something they can't quite name. They feel it in the way you pause before you speak, in the way you choose silence over arguing, in the way you don't chase, don't beg, don't overstep. Your restraint becomes a mirror. It reflects their own emotional chaos. And rather than lowering yourself to meet their volatility, you hold your line. That steadiness, that composure, it sets you apart. It's not about being cold, it's about being clear. You don't react just because someone wants a reaction. You don't explain just because someone feels entitled to answers. And you don't perform for the sake of validation. Your restraint says, I know who I am, I don't need to prove it. And that clarity, that's what people remember long after you leave the room. Long after the words fade, the way you held yourself stays with them. You don't become unforgettable by being everywhere, by being loud, by being constantly available. You become unforgettable by being intentional, by mastering the art of restraint in a world addicted to noise. There's a quiet confidence in someone who can walk into a room and command presence without uttering a single word. And it rarely has anything to do with appearance or status. It's far deeper than that. It's the energy, the unshakable calm, the way they carry themselves, like they're rooted in something solid, while everyone else floats in uncertainty. You notice it in their stillness, in their awareness, in the way they observe, instead of needing to be seen. That's the kind of presence that lingers in people's minds, and it's cultivated, not inherited. People think being unforgettable is about standing out, but it's actually about standing firm. When you are grounded, when you know who you are and you act in alignment with it, you don't have to say anything to make an impression. It's felt in your posture, in your gaze, in the choices you make without apology. The world is constantly shifting, but when you are anchored, others sense it. They may not be able to articulate what it is, but they'll remember how it made them feel. Like they were standing next to a force that wasn't trying to impress them, just being entirely itself. Most people broadcast their insecurities without knowing it. They're jittery, they interrupt, they need constant validation, they overtalk and overperform. It's exhausting to be around. But someone who is centered doesn't need to do any of that. They listen, they breathe, they respond rather than react. And ironically, that self-possession makes people want to lean in, because in a room full of noise, stillness becomes magnetic. Being grounded isn't about pretending nothing affects you. It's about not being shaken by things that don't deserve to rattle you. It means you've done the work to understand your values, your limits, your boundaries, and you're not willing to sacrifice those just to fit in or be liked. That clarity makes you rare, and rarity is memorable. The less you chase attention, the more attention finds you. That's the paradox. Presence is also about consistency. Not in being predictable, but in being authentic. When your words, actions, and energy all reflect the same foundation, when people can feel that you mean what you say and live what you believe, then they don't forget you, not because you performed for them, but because you showed them what integrity looks like. That has a way of imprinting itself on others, especially in a world where most are still figuring themselves out. You start to realize that being unforgettable isn't about forcing impact. It's about alignment. It's about showing up, not trying to be impressive, but simply being real. Being composed, self-awareness, and fully present in your own body. And that's something people can't fake. You know it when you see it. You feel it when you're near it. You remember it long after it's gone. So if your goal is to be someone they think about even after the conversation ends, if you want to carry a presence that leaves a mark, start by becoming still. Not passive, but intentional. Rooted in who you are. Because when your presence speaks before you do, you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. We often underestimate the power of subtlety. There's a kind of strength in restraint that most people overlook. In a world where everyone is competing to be seen, heard, and validated, the individual who communicates their worth without announcing it becomes unforgettable. It's not about arrogance, it's about quiet assurance. The way you treat others when you have nothing to prove reveals everything, and that's where your impact begins. Think about how rare it is to meet someone who's genuinely kind without being performative. Someone who respects others, not to be liked, but because it's a reflection of their own standards. That kind of behavior stands out, not in a flashy, dramatic way, but in the way it lingers in someone's memory. People may not recall your words, but they'll remember how you made them feel, especially when that feeling was rooted in subtle acts of respect, empathy, and unwavering presence. You don't need to be loud to show strength. You don't need to dominate conversations or spotlight yourself. Sometimes what makes you unforgettable is the way you listen, truly listen. Not waiting for your turn to speak, not sizing someone up, but being fully there. Giving someone the gift of your undivided attention in a distracted world is one of the most powerful statements you can make. It tells people, I see you, I value this moment, and I'm not here to perform, I'm here to connect. That's unforgettable. There's also something deeply compelling about emotional discipline. When you're able to remain calm in the face of chaos, when you respond rather than react, people notice. You don't have to advertise that you've done the inner work. It shows. It shows in the way you move through the world without letting every little thing shake you. And the people around you feel safer, more stable just by your presence. That's the kind of person others remember, not because they demanded attention, but because they offered clarity in a space full of confusion. The truth is, you create a lasting impression not by what you say, but by what you do consistently. Your habits, your self-respect, your ability to walk away from things that don't serve your values. All of these shape how people perceive you. And over time, they create a story in someone else's mind about who you are. If that story is rooted in calm strength, quiet kindness, and unshakable integrity, then you don't need to say much at all. Your life becomes the statement. So while others are busy chasing recognition, bending themselves to please crowds, you become unforgettable by being anchored. Not flashy, not dramatic, just deeply consistent in your values, your energy, and your treatment of others. That's the legacy that lives in people's minds, not because you pushed it on them, but because they felt it. They experienced it. And when you show up like that, without needing to be noticed, you end up being the person they never forget. It's strange how the things we don't say often speak the loudest, and one of the most unforgettable traits you can embody is the ability to walk away silently, without bitterness, without explanation, without drama. That kind of calm detachment, it sends a shockwave through the people who took your presence for granted. Because the most powerful message you'll ever send is conveyed through your absence, through the space you leave behind that they never thought they'd miss until it's gone. Walking away doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've reached a level of self-respect where you no longer need to convince someone of your value. You no longer argue for the bare minimum. You no longer tolerate inconsistency or emotional confusion. Instead of chasing or pleading, you choose silence, not out of pride, but out of clarity. Because silence can't be manipulated. It can't be twisted or debated. It just is. And the truth buried in that silence tends to echo in the minds of those who overlooked you. That silence, the kind that follows your graceful exit, is often the loudest awakening for others. When someone expected chaos, expected you to beg, expected a scene, and instead receives peace, they're forced to confront the weight of your absence. They begin to remember all the ways you showed up, all the moments you were patient, generous, forgiving, and now, without any words exchanged, they feel the finality, they feel the shift. That's unforgettable, because it was never about grand gestures, it was about who you were consistently and who you chose not to be when things fell apart. There's a kind of elegance in not needing closure from someone who never offered clarity to begin with, in choosing to preserve your dignity instead of engaging in emotional tug-of-wars. And the deeper truth is this: people often remember the ones who didn't fight to stay, but instead left with self-respect intact. The ones who didn't try to prove their worth, but simply embodied it. That's the kind of presence that lingers long after you're gone. Not because of what you did to be remembered, but because of what you refused to do to be forgotten. When you walk away silently, you're not just making a statement about the situation. You're making a declaration about yourself, that you're no longer available for emotional games, that your peace is more important than someone's confusion, that your self-worth is non-negotiable, and it's in that silence where your power multiplies. Because while they're still trying to decode your quiet, you're already evolving beyond the dynamic. You don't need to argue to be right. You don't need to explain your pain to be validated, and you certainly don't need to break yourself down to be understood. What you need is the courage to exit what no longer aligns and the strength to stay silent while others catch up to the reality you've already accepted. That kind of silence turns into a lesson, not because you wanted to teach it, but because it became unavoidable. And in that moment, when your presence is missed, your silence is felt, and your absence is louder than any words you could have said, you become unforgettable. Or you get the win. On an impromptu budget meeting, without contact,